The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Admiral Zeftar's crystalline form shimmered with barely contained fear. His four arms trembled as he manipulated the holographic display, showing the latest reports from the Outer Rim territories. The assembled representatives of 37 species watched in growing horror as the data painted a picture that none of them wanted to believe. The humans have taken another 12 systems, Zeftar announced, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that betrayed his species' distress. Their expansion rate has increased by 40% in the last standard cycle. Ambassador Velnara of the Symphonic Collective leaned forward, her melodious voice carrying notes of panic. How is this possible? We have superior technology, superior numbers, superior everything. These humans only discovered faster-than-light travel 300 of their years ago. The hologram shifted, displaying footage from the Battle of Kepler, 442. The assembled council members watched as human vessels, crude and angular compared to their own elegant designs, tore through a fleet of advanced hegemony warships. The humans fought with a brutality and efficiency that defied all conventional military doctrine. Their ships were smaller, their weapons less sophisticated, yet they won every engagement through sheer, incomprehensible aggression. They do not fight like civilized beings, growled General Throax of the militant caste, his reptilian features twisting in disgust. They ram their ships into ours when their weapons fail. They board our vessels and fight with primitive projectile weapons and bladed instruments. Who brings knives to a plasma fight? Humans do, whispered Counselor Zine, the ancient ethereal's form flickering as his emotional field destabilized. And somehow they win. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, each species expressing their disbelief and terror in their own unique way. The crystallines sang their fear in harmonic frequencies that made the air itself vibrate. The gaseous collective swirled in agitated patterns, their forms becoming increasingly chaotic. The machine intelligence representatives simply stated statistical probabilities that all pointed to the same conclusion. Humanity was an anomaly that defied all logical parameters. Admiral Zeftar raised all four arms for silence. "There is more," he said, his voice heavy with dread. "Our intelligence networks have intercepted human communications. They speak of something they call the strategic elite." The hologram changed again, displaying intercepted human transmissions. The alien translation matrices struggled with human idioms and colloquialisms, but the general meaning was clear enough. Humans were discussing individuals and organizations within their military structure that were apparently so effective, so dangerous, that even other humans spoke of them in hushed, reverent tones. "We've identified several references," Zeftar continued. Ghost Company, an infantry unit that supposedly completed a mission against the Zephyrian Collective with 0 casualties, while inflicting over 90% enemy losses. The Prometheus Group, described as strategic planners whose battle plans have never failed. And something called the Obsidian Circle, which appears to be their intelligence apparatus. Velnara's song became discordant. "Surely these are exaggerations. Propaganda to boost morale." "That's what we thought," replied Zeftar grimly, "until we encountered them ourselves." The hologram shifted to show classified footage from the Tau Ceti incident. 3 months ago, a joint task force of council species had attempted to establish a blockade around the human colony world of New Geneva. The operation should have been routine. Overwhelming force applied against an isolated human outpost to demonstrate the Council's superior military capabilities. Instead, the footage showed disaster. The human defenders had somehow anticipated the attack, despite the operation being classified at the highest levels. Worse, they had laid an elaborate trap. What should have been a demonstration of Council superiority became a massacre. Entire fleets vanished into carefully constructed ambushes. Ground forces found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to know their every move before they made it. Ghost Company was responsible for the ground campaign, Zeftar explained as the footage showed Council forces being systematically dismantled by an enemy, they could barely see. 47 of the galaxy's most elite soldiers, representing 7 species, against 12 humans. The humans suffered one injury, a broken arm from when one of their soldiers fell down a cliff while pursuing fleeing council forces. The chamber fell silent except for the ambient humming of life support systems. On the screen, they watched armored council soldiers running in blind panic through a forest, pursued by shadows that struck without warning and disappeared without trace. The Prometheus group designed the overall defensive strategy. Zeftar continued remorselessly. They anticipated not just our attack, but the exact composition of our forces, our probable tactics, and even our fallback positions. It was as if they could read our minds. Counselor Zine's form solidified slightly as he focused his attention. That should be impossible. Our operational security was absolute. Which brings us to the obsidian circle, Zeftar said, his crystalline structure darkening with fear. Our intelligence suggests that they had penetrated our communications, our planning sessions, and possibly even this very council itself. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The representatives looked at each other with suspicion, each wondering if the beings they had worked alongside for decades might be human agents. The very idea was preposterous. Humans looked nothing like any council species. Their crude biology was easily detectable, and their psychological profiles were completely alien to civilized thought patterns. Yet somehow, they were always one step ahead. "How do we fight an enemy that knows our every move?" asked General Throax, his usual bravado replaced by uncertainty. "We don't," said a new voice from the chamber's entrance. The assembled council turned to see high strategist Mordan striding into the chamber. The ancient Caltharian's insectoid form moved with fluid grace despite his advanced age, and his compound eyes reflected the chamber's lights in patterns that spoke of deep calculation. As the Council's supreme military commander, his presence could only mean one thing. "You have new intelligence?" asked Zeftar hopefully. Mordan's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. "I have a revelation. One that changes everything we thought we knew about human warfare." The holographic display cleared, replaced by a simple star map showing human space. Red markers indicated recent human military actions, while blue showed council territories. The pattern was clear. Humanity was expanding in a methodical, calculated manner that suggested long-term strategic thinking rather than opportunistic aggression. "We have been approaching this problem incorrectly," Mordan announced. "We assumed that humans were simply better at conventional warfare than expected. We hypothesized that their aggression and unpredictability gave them tactical advantages. We theorized that their rapid technological advancement had somehow exceeded our own." His compound eyes focused on each council member in turn. "We were wrong about everything." The chamber's atmospheric processors hummed nervously as if even the building's systems were affected by the growing tension. "The truth is far more terrifying," Mordan continued. "Humans are not better at warfare than we are. They are better at thinking than we are." Velnara's song became a confused tangle of notes. "That cannot be true. The symphonic collective has spent millennia perfecting the art of strategic thought. The Caltharian hives have processed battle scenarios for longer than most species have existed. The machine intelligences calculate probabilities at quantum speeds. And yet," Mordan said quietly, 12 humans defeated our finest warriors. Unknown human strategists outmaneuvered our greatest military minds. Human intelligence operatives penetrated security systems that have protected council secrets for centuries. He manipulated the hologram, zooming in on specific battle sites. "Look at the patterns. Every human victory follows the same basic structure. They gather intelligence through methods we cannot detect. They analyze our capabilities with frightening accuracy. They predict our responses with uncanny precision. Then, they implement strategies that turn our own strengths against us." General Throax's scales bristled with agitation. "You speak as if they were telepathic." "Worse, Mordan replied. Telepathy can be blocked, shielded against, detected. This is something else entirely. Humans appear to possess an intuitive understanding of strategic thinking that transcends conventional analysis. They see patterns we miss, anticipate possibilities we never consider, and execute plans with a precision that suggests they understand our psychology better than we understand it ourselves. The implications of this statement sent ripples of fear through the chamber. Each species represented on the council had reached the stars through their own unique advantages. The crystalline had mastered harmonic technologies that allowed them to manipulate matter at the molecular level. The machine intelligences had achieved computational capabilities that approached the theoretical limits of information processing. The ethereals had developed mental abilities that allowed them to perceive reality in ways that other species couldn't imagine. Yet humans, with their crude technology and brief history, were consistently outperforming them all in the most fundamental skill of intelligent beings, the ability to think strategically. "There's more," Mordan said, and his voice carried undertones that made several council members recoil instinctively. "Our analysis of human historical records reveals something that explains their current capabilities." The hologram shifted to show data extracted from human information networks. The translation matrices had worked for months to decode human historical records, and what they found defied belief. "Humans have been at war continuously for their entire recorded history," Mordan announced. "Not just occasional conflicts over resources or territory, but constant, unending warfare. They have fought each other with every weapon imaginable, using every conceivable strategy in every possible environment. They have refined the art of warfare to a degree that we cannot comprehend because we have never needed to." The chamber erupted in disbelief. Ambassador Velnara's song became a harsh discord. "Surely you exaggerate. No species could survive continuous warfare for thousands of years." "They not only survived," Mordan replied grimly. "They thrived. Each war taught them new lessons. Each conflict refined their abilities. Each victory and defeat added to a collective understanding of strategic thinking that spans millennia. When humans finally reached the stars, they brought with them the accumulated military wisdom of a species that had turned warfare into an art form." Counselor Zine's form flickered with agitation. "This explains their tactical abilities, but what of this strategic elite they speak of? Are these simply their most experienced warriors?" Mordan's mandibles clicked in what definitely was not amusement. "That is what we initially believed. However, further analysis suggests something far more disturbing. The strategic elite appear to be humans who have been specifically selected and trained from birth to be perfect strategic thinkers. They are not soldiers who became strategists, but individuals who have been shaped by their society to be living weapons of strategic warfare." The hologram displayed new data showing human educational systems and military academies. The analysis revealed a civilization that identified potential strategic thinkers at an early age and then subjected them to training regimens that would be considered torture by most civilized species. "Ghost Company represents their tactical elite," Mordan explained. "Soldiers who have been trained to think faster, move more efficiently, and kill more effectively than should be biologically possible. The Prometheus group consists of strategic planners who approach warfare like a science, analyzing variables and calculating outcomes with machine-like precision. The Obsidian Circle appears to be their intelligence specialists, individuals who have been trained to understand alien psychology so thoroughly that they can predict our actions before we make them." The chamber fell silent as the full implications sank in. They were not fighting a species that happened to be good at warfare. They were fighting a civilization that had spent millennia perfecting the art of strategic thinking and had now turned that accumulated expertise against the galaxy itself. "What do we do?" whispered Velnara, her song reduced to barely audible harmonics. Mordan's compound eyes reflected the chamber's lights in patterns that spoke of calculations beyond imagination. "We have three options," he said finally. "We can surrender and hope that humans prove to be benevolent conquerors. We can continue fighting and watch our civilizations be systematically dismantled. Or, he paused, and every being in the chamber leaned forward. Or we can attempt to understand them well enough to fight them effectively. We must learn to think like humans if we want to defeat them. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge to everything the council believed about civilization, progress, and the nature of intelligent life itself. To learn to think like humans would mean embracing their crude aggression, their willingness to sacrifice anything for victory, their obsession with strategic advantage over honor or fairness. It would mean becoming monsters to fight monsters. But as the holographic display continued to show the inexorable advance of human forces across the galaxy, the assembled representatives began to realize that they might not have any choice. The galaxy had feared humanity's warriors, their weapons, their ships, and their willingness to fight. Now they were beginning to understand that they should have been fearing something far more dangerous: the human capacity to think strategically about everything, including the systematic conquest of an entire galaxy that had foolishly believed itself to be the pinnacle of intelligent evolution. The strategic elite were coming, and the Council was beginning to realize that they were not prepared for what that meant. The transport ship Infinite Probability drifted silently through the debris field that had once been the vegan defense fleet. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge, watching the cleanup crews collect intelligence from the wreckage. Her dark eyes reflected the cold light of distant stars as she reviewed the tactical reports on her personal display. Another perfect victory, another demonstration that the galaxy's so-called superior civilizations were nothing more than children playing with toys they didn't understand. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Torres from the communications station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. Eyes only, obsidian clearance." Elena's expression didn't change, but those who knew her well would have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. Obsidian clearance meant the transmission was from the Circle itself, the intelligence network that most humans didn't even know existed. She nodded and made her way to her private ready room, sealing the door behind her. The holographic projector activated, revealing the familiar figure of Director Sarah Chun. The director's Asian features were composed and professional, but Elena could read the subtle signs of excitement in her posture. Something significant had happened. "Captain Vasquez," Director Chin began without preamble, "congratulations on the Vega operation. Your tactical assessment was correct. The aliens are completely unable to adapt to irregular warfare patterns. However, we have a new priority mission." The hologram shifted to display a star map of Council space. Red indicators showed recent human advances, while blue markers indicated strong Council defensive positions. Elena noted several areas where the human advance had slowed, not stopped, but definitely encountering more organized resistance than expected. "The aliens are beginning to adapt," Director Chen continued. "Our intelligence suggests they've realized that their conventional military thinking is inadequate against human strategic capabilities. More importantly, they appear to be attempting to study our methods." Elena raised an eyebrow. It was the most emotion she'd shown in months. "They're trying to think like us?" "Precisely. Which brings us to your new assignment. We've identified a Council research facility on Kepler 186F where they're conducting intensive studies of human military psychology. They've apparently captured several of our soldiers and are attempting to understand how we think strategically." The star map zoomed in on a system near the edge of Council space. Elena studied the tactical display, noting the defensive positions, supply routes, and communication arrays. Her mind automatically began calculating approach vectors, identifying weaknesses, and formulating attack scenarios. "What's the mission profile?" she asked. Director Chen's image smiled slightly, an expression that never reached her eyes. "Total intelligence denial. We cannot allow the aliens to develop countermeasures to human strategic thinking. Your orders are to infiltrate the facility, extract our people, and ensure that no trace of their research survives. Understood. What assets am I authorized to deploy? Full strategic elite authorization. Ghost Company for tactical operations, Prometheus Group for mission planning, and complete Obsidian Circle intelligence support. This mission has been classified as existentially critical to human expansion. Elena noted. Existentially critical meant that failure would threaten humanity's ability to continue its galactic conquest. It was the highest possible mission priority, one that authorized the use of any methods necessary to ensure success. The hologram shifted again, showing detailed intelligence reports. Elena absorbed the information with the speed that had made her one of the strategic elite's most valuable operators. The research facility was operated by something called the Caltharian Institute for Strategic Studies, apparently the Council's premier military think tank. They had been analyzing captured human equipment, intercepted communications, and psychological profiles of human prisoners of war. Worse, they were making progress. Our analysis suggests they've identified several key aspects of human strategic thinking, Director Chin continued. They understand our emphasis on deception and misdirection. They've recognized our willingness to accept casualties in exchange for strategic advantage. Most concerning, they appear to have grasped the concept of total warfare, the human tendency to view every conflict as existential rather than limited. Elena's expression darkened. Total warfare was humanity's greatest strategic advantage. Other species fought for territory, resources, or political objectives. Humans fought to win completely and permanently. The idea that aliens might learn to think in similar terms was genuinely disturbing. There's more, Director Chin said, reading Elena's expression. They've identified you specifically as a person of interest. Apparently your tactical innovations at Proxima Centauri have attracted their attention. They're actively seeking to understand how one human can consistently outmaneuver multiple alien strategists. The Proxima Centauri operation had been Elena's masterpiece, a complex deception that convinced 3 alien fleets to destroy each other while pursuing phantom human forces. The battle had ended with minimal human casualties and the complete destruction of an enemy force that outnumbered them 50-1. Do they understand the methodology? Elena asked. Not yet, but they're learning, which is why this mission cannot fail. We need you to demonstrate to the aliens that even when they think they understand us, they still don't understand us well enough. The hologram displayed the mission timeline. Elena would have 72 hours to prepare before departure. Ghost Company was already being assembled. 12 of humanity's most lethal soldiers, each trained from childhood to kill efficiently and think tactically. The Prometheus Group would provide strategic support, analyzing alien defensive patterns and developing optimal assault plans. Obsidian Circle would handle intelligence, gathering, and communication security. What about extraction? Elena asked, studying the facility's location deep in council space. Director Chin's smile became predatory. That's the beautiful part of this mission, Captain. There is no extraction plan. Elena's eyebrows rose fractionally. Mom, the aliens expect us to infiltrate, complete our objectives, and withdraw. They're preparing for a surgical strike by a small team of specialists. What they're not expecting is for the strategic elite to use this mission as an opportunity to field test a new operational concept. The hologram changed to show a massive fleet deployment. Elena recognized the configuration. It was designed for total system conquest rather than limited strategic objectives. We're turning your infiltration mission into the opening move of a full-scale offensive, Director Chen explained. While you're inside the facility gathering intelligence and eliminating their research, the Second Fleet will be positioning for a comprehensive assault on their entire defense network. Your mission success will signal the beginning of what the Prometheus Group is calling Operation Inevitable Conclusion. Elena studied the fleet deployment with professional appreciation. It was elegant in its brutality, a perfect example of human strategic thinking. Use the enemy's expectations against them, turn a defensive reaction into an offensive opportunity, and ensure that victory is so complete that future resistance becomes impossible. "What's my specific role once the main assault begins?" she asked. "You'll coordinate with Ghost Company to ensure that the facility's destruction appears to be the result of your infiltration mission rather than external bombardment. The aliens must believe the human special operations capabilities are even more advanced than they suspected. Fear of our tactical abilities will delay their adaptation efforts and buy us time for the next phase of expansion." Elena nodded, her mind already working through the operational details. The mission was complex, but achievable, assuming that the aliens hadn't made more progress in understanding human strategic thinking than the intelligence report suggested. "There is one more thing," Director Chen said, her tone becoming more serious. "We've identified at least one alien researcher who appears to have developed genuine insights into human psychology. A Caltharian named Mordan who's been analyzing our tactical patterns with disturbing accuracy. He's the primary target for elimination. His continued existence represents an unacceptable threat to human strategic superiority." The hologram displayed a detailed file on High Strategist Mordan. Elena read through his analysis with growing respect and concern. The alien's insights into human warfare were remarkably sophisticated. He had identified patterns that even some humans hadn't consciously recognized. Worse, his psychological profiles of human strategic thinking were accurate enough to be genuinely dangerous. "He's good," Elena admitted. "He's too good," Director Chen replied, "which is why he cannot be allowed to continue his research. Mordan represents the first real threat we've encountered to our strategic superiority. He must be eliminated before he can share his insights with other Council species." Elena closed the file and looked directly at Director Chen's holographic image. "Understood. One question. What happens if the aliens have made more progress than we think? What if they've already developed effective countermeasures to human strategic thinking?" Director Chen's smile became genuinely cold. "Then we activate Protocol 7 and demonstrate why the strategic elite exists in the first place. The aliens fear our warriors and our weapons, Captain. They're beginning to understand our tactical capabilities. But they have no comprehension of what humans are truly capable of when we stop holding back." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Protocol 7 was the contingency plan that no one talked about, the strategic option that existed in case conventional conquest proved impossible. She'd read the theoretical assessments, but she'd never imagined that circumstances might arise where its implementation became necessary. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," she said quietly. "Indeed, which is why this mission is so important. We need to maintain our strategic advantage long enough to complete galactic pacification through conventional means. The alternatives are unpleasant for everyone involved." The transmission ended, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and the weight of an entire galaxy's future. She activated her personal communication system and began issuing orders. Ghost Company would need detailed briefings. The Prometheus group would require complete intelligence data for their strategic analysis. Obsidian Circle would need to update their infiltration protocols. But first, Elena opened her personal files and reviewed the psychological profile she'd compiled on herself years ago. Understanding the enemy was important, but understanding yourself was essential. She needed to think like a human strategic planner, thinking about aliens trying to think like human strategic planners. The irony wasn't lost on her. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were trying desperately to understand the species they'd initially dismissed as crude barbarians. They were beginning to realize that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or numbers or even tactical skill. It was the simple fact that humans had been thinking about warfare longer and more intensively than any other species in the galaxy. Elena smiled as she began planning her mission. The aliens wanted to understand human strategic thinking. She was going to give them a lesson they'd never forget, assuming any of them survived long enough to benefit from the experience. The strategic elite were about to show the galaxy what happened when humans stopped trying to be civilized and started trying to win permanently. It was going to be educational for everyone involved, though Elena doubted that most of the aliens would appreciate the learning opportunity she was about to provide them. The Caltharian Institute for Strategic Studies sprawled across the northern continent of Kepler, 186F like a crystalline cancer. High strategist Mordan stood in his private laboratory, surrounded by holographic displays showing human battle footage, psychological profiles, and strategic analyses that had consumed 18 months of intensive research. His compound eyes processed multiple data streams simultaneously as his four arms manipulated different control interfaces with practiced precision. Behind him, the latest subject sat restrained in a containment field. Marine Sergeant David Kim stared back at Mordan with the steady gaze that the Caltharian had learned to recognize in all human prisoners. There was no fear in those eyes, no desperation, no hope for rescue. There was only a cold calculation that made Mordan's carapace twitch with uneasiness. "Tell me about Ghost Company," Mordan said in carefully modulated English, his translator converting his natural clicks and harmonics into human speech patterns. Sergeant Kim's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're talking about." Mordan's mandibles clicked in frustration. After 18 months of interrogation, he'd learned that humans were capable of maintaining deceptions even under extreme psychological pressure. They could lie convincingly while hooked to truth detection equipment, mislead interrogators while under the influence of mental compulsion fields, and maintain operational security even when facing certain death. It was a level of mental discipline that defied everything the Council understood about intelligent behavior. "We know Ghost Company exists," Mordan continued patiently. "We've analyzed the tactical patterns from 17 different engagements. The precision, the coordination, the absolutely impossible success rates. No conventional military unit achieves these results through normal training methods." Sergeant Kim remained silent, but Mordan detected a slight shift in his biometric readings. Increased heart rate, elevated stress hormones, micro-expressions indicating internal conflict. The human was fighting an internal battle between operational security and what appeared to be pride. "You're proud of them," Mordan observed. "These Ghost Company soldiers represent something important to human military culture. They're not just effective, they're symbolic." For the first time, Sergeant Kim reacted visibly. His jaw clenched almost imperceptibly, and his breathing pattern shifted. Mordan's sensors detected emotional responses consistent with protective instincts and personal loyalty. "They represent the pinnacle of human tactical evolution," Mordan continued, studying the biometric data. "But they're more than just soldiers, aren't they? They're proof that humans can transcend biological limitations through training and determination. They're living examples of human strategic superiority." The laboratory's main door chimed, and assistant researcher Telnara entered carrying a datapad. The young Caltharian's carapace bore the blue striping that indicated recent graduation from the Institute's advanced programs. She approached Mordan with a mixture of respect and nervousness that junior researchers displayed around the Institute's most senior analyst. "High strategist," she said, offering the data pad with two of her forearms. "We've received disturbing intelligence from our monitoring stations." Mordan accepted the pad without taking his primary eyes off Sergeant Kim. His secondary visual systems processed the incoming data while maintaining surveillance on his subject. What he saw made his carapace darken with alarm. "Human fleet movements," he observed, noting the tactical displays. "Significant force concentration near the Kepler 452 system." "Yes, sir. Analysis suggests preparation for a major offensive operation. The force composition includes elements we've never seen before, ships that don't match any known human design specifications." Mordan's attention shifted fully to the datapad. The human fleet disposition was unlike anything in their intelligence files. The ships were larger than typical human designs, heavily armed, and configured in formations that suggested they were preparing for extended deep space operations rather than the hit-and-run tactics that humans normally employed. When was this fleet first detected? Mordan asked. 17 hours ago, sir. But the concerning part is that our analysis suggests these ships have been in position for at least 72 hours. Our monitoring systems somehow failed to detect them until they chose to become visible. Mordan felt a chill run through his entire nervous system. Human stealth technology had always been impressive, but the ability to hide an entire fleet from Council sensor networks suggested capabilities far beyond what they'd previously demonstrated. Sir, Telnara continued hesitantly, there's something else. The fleet's positioning suggests they're not preparing to attack our border defenses. They're positioned for an assault on this system. The data pad slipped from Mordan's grasp, clattering to the laboratory floor. His compound eyes swiveled to focus on Sergeant Kim, who was watching the exchange with what appeared to be carefully controlled satisfaction. You knew, Mordan said quietly. You knew they were coming. Sergeant Kim's expression didn't change, but Mordan detected subtle changes in his biosignature. Decreased stress indicators, slightly elevated dopamine levels, micro-expressions consistent with anticipation. Ghost Company isn't just a tactical unit, Mordan realized. They're part of a larger operational structure. The strategic elite that our intelligence reports mention. It's not just special forces, it's an entire parallel command structure designed for operations that regular human military forces can't execute. The laboratory's emergency communication system activated, filling the air with urgent harmonic patterns that made both Caltharians instinctively recoil. Mordan activated his personal communicator with one arm, while maintaining surveillance equipment with the others. Hi, Strategist Mordan, he answered. Sir, this is Control Center Alpha, came the reply in rapid-fire clicks and whistles. We have multiple alerts from perimeter defense stations. Our sensors are detecting massive energy signatures consistent with human fleet activation. Estimated time to weapons range is 43 minutes. Mordan's carapace went completely black, a Caltharian stress response that indicated overwhelming fear. Alert status? Maximum defensive posture, sir. All research materials are being prepared for emergency evacuation according to Protocol 7. Mordan ended the communication and stared at Sergeant Kim with new understanding. The human's biometric readings showed continued satisfaction and what appeared to be anticipation of imminent rescue. This was planned, Mordan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Your capture, our research efforts, everything. You've been feeding us information to study our analysis methods. Sergeant Kim spoke for the first time in hours. You're getting better at this strategic thinking thing, he said conversationally. But you're still missing the bigger picture, which is, we didn't just let you capture me to study your research methods, Kim replied, his voice carrying undertones of satisfaction that made Mordan's sensory organs twitch with unease. We let you capture me to test whether you were getting close to understanding us well enough to be a threat. The implications hit Mordan like a physical blow. You're saying this entire facility, all our research, it's been a comprehensive examination to determine whether Council species have the intellectual capacity to develop effective countermeasures to human strategic thinking, Kim finished. Congratulations, High Strategist. You passed the test. Mordan felt his legs weaken. Which means you've demonstrated that Council species can learn to think strategically when sufficiently motivated. Which means you represent a potential threat to human galactic expansion. Which means this facility and everyone in it needs to be eliminated before you can share your insights with other Council species. The laboratory's lights flickered as massive energy discharges lit up the sky outside. Through the crystalline walls, Mordan could see the unmistakable flashes of human plasma weapons engaging the Institute's defense grid. The attack had begun with surgical precision, targeting communication arrays and sensor networks first to prevent calls for reinforcement. How many ships? Mordan asked, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Enough, Kim replied simply. Telnara was frantically working at one of the laboratory's communication stations, trying to establish contact with the Institute's command center. Her efforts were unsuccessful. The human attack had clearly prioritized communication denial to prevent coordination of defensive efforts. "Sir," she called desperately, "I can't reach anyone. All communication networks appear to be compromised." Mordan moved to the laboratory's main display system and activated external sensors. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The human attack wasn't the crude assault he might have expected from conventional military doctrine. Instead, it demonstrated the sophisticated strategic thinking he'd spent months trying to understand. The humans had somehow infiltrated the Institute's perimeter defenses before the main attack began. Key defensive positions were being destroyed from within by explosives that must have been planted days or weeks in advance. Communication networks were being systematically disabled by electronic warfare methods that suggested intimate knowledge of Council technology systems. Most disturbing of all, the human ground forces weren't simply attacking. They were moving with purpose towards specific targets within the facility. They knew exactly where to go to find the most important research materials and the most valuable personnel. Ghost Company, Mordan breathed, understanding flooding through him. 12 of the finest tactical operators humanity has ever produced, Kim confirmed. Each one trained from childhood to think strategically, fight efficiently, and kill anyone who threatens human interests. They've been planning this infiltration for months while we've been studying you studying us. The laboratory's security door dissolved under the focused beam of human plasma cutters. Through the opening stepped figures in black tactical armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their movements were fluid and coordinated, suggesting the kind of training that required decades to perfect. The lead figure removed their helmet, revealing the face of a human female with dark eyes that reflected intelligence, determination, and absolutely no mercy whatsoever. She looked directly at Mordan with the kind of assessment that predators used when evaluating prey. "High strategist Mordan," she said in perfect Caltharian, her pronunciation indicating extensive linguistic training. "I'm Captain Elena Vasquez, strategic elite. We need to talk." Mordan's compound eyes focused on the insignia visible on her armor. Ghost Company operators, Prometheus Group strategic planners, Obsidian Circle intelligence specialists. The strategic elite had deployed an integrated team specifically for this mission. "You're here to kill me," he stated. "Actually, no," Captain Vasquez replied, stepping further into the laboratory while her team maintained defensive positions. "We're here to offer you a choice." Telnara made a sudden movement toward one of the laboratory's emergency systems, but froze as two Ghost Company operators trained their weapons on her with movements too fast for Caltharian reflexes to counter. "What kind of choice?" Mordan asked, his analytical mind working frantically to understand the strategic implications of this conversation. Captain Vasquez gestured toward the holographic displays, showing Mordan's research into human strategic thinking. "You've demonstrated genuine insight into human psychology and tactical methodology. Your analysis of our strategic patterns shows intellectual capabilities that most council species lack. You understand us well enough to be genuinely dangerous to human expansion plans, which is why you're going to eliminate me and destroy my research, which is why we're going to offer you the opportunity to work for us instead." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Mordan's sensory organs twitched with confusion and disbelief. Around the laboratory, his research team stared at the human captain with expressions of shock and terror. "You want me to betray my own species," Mordan said slowly. "We want you to help us understand Council species well enough to conquer them efficiently," Captain Vasquez corrected. "Your choice is between serving human interests voluntarily or watching your civilization be systematically dismantled by force. Either way, human expansion will continue. The only question is whether you want to minimize the casualties or maximize them." Mordan's mind raced through the strategic implications. The humans weren't just offering him personal survival. They were offering him the opportunity to influence how the conquest proceeded. If he refused, the strategic elite would simply eliminate him and continue their expansion through brute force. If he accepted, he might be able to guide the process in ways that preserved at least some aspects of Council civilization. It was, he realized with growing horror, exactly the kind of strategic thinking that made humans so dangerous. They weren't just conquering through superior force. They were conquering by giving their enemies reasons to collaborate in their own defeat. "What guarantee do I have that you'll honor any agreement we might reach?" he asked. Captain Vasquez smiled, and the expression was genuinely terrifying. "You have the guarantee that humans always keep their word when it's strategically advantageous to do so. Betraying useful allies is counterproductive to long-term expansion goals." Around the laboratory, the sounds of systematic destruction continued as Ghost Company teams eliminated research materials and secured key personnel. The entire operation was proceeding with machine-like efficiency that spoke of extensive planning and perfect coordination. Mordan looked at Sergeant Kim, who had been watching the exchange with obvious satisfaction. This was always the plan, wasn't it? Capture, analysis, recruitment, or elimination. "Welcome to human strategic thinking," Kim replied. "We don't just solve immediate problems. We solve future problems before they become current problems." The weight of the decision pressed down on Mordan like a physical force. Refuse, and die knowing that his civilization would be conquered anyway. Accept, and survive while helping to plan the conquest of everything he'd spent his life defending. Either way, the galaxy belonged to humanity now. The strategic elite had just demonstrated why the Council had been right to fear them. 6 months after the fall of the Caltharian Institute, High Strategist Mordan stood in the command center of a human vessel inevitable conclusion, watching as the final Council stronghold prepared for what its defenders believed would be their last stand. The irony was not lost on him that he now wore the black uniform of a strategic elite consultant, his 4 arms moving efficiently across human design control interfaces as he helped plan the conquest of his former allies. Around him, the command center hummed with quiet efficiency. Ghost Company operators moved between tactical stations with fluid precision. Prometheus Group analysts reviewed strategic assessments with machine-like focus. Obsidian Circle Intelligence specialists processed information from sources throughout Council space with an attention to detail that bordered on obsession. And, overseeing it all, Captain Elena Vasquez stood at the Central Command Station, her dark eyes reflecting the cold light of distant stars as she coordinated humanity's final push toward total galactic dominance. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never failed a mission. "All fleets are in position," replied Commander Harrison from the tactical station. "The Council Defense Force has concentrated their remaining ships around Kepler 442, exactly as our analysis predicted." Mordan's compound eyes focused on the holographic display showing the tactical situation. The Council's final fleet was impressive. Over 3,000 ships representing the combined military might of 37 species. It should have been enough to at least inflict serious casualties on the attacking human forces. It would have been enough if the Council commanders had understood that they were walking into a trap that had been 18 months in the making. "Sir," called Lieutenant Torres from the communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from the Council fleet. Admiral Zeftar is requesting a parley." Captain Vasquez turned to look at Mordan, her expression unreadable. "Your assessment, High Strategist?" Mordan felt the familiar mixture of pride and shame that had become his constant companion since joining the human strategic apparatus. Pride in his analytical skills, shame in how he was using them. "Admiral Zeftar is attempting to buy time for reinforcements that he believes are coming from the Vega sector. He doesn't know that those fleets were destroyed 72 hours ago by Ghost Company infiltration teams. And his psychological profile? Zeftar is fundamentally honorable, which makes him predictable. He will attempt to negotiate terms that preserve Council civilian populations, even though he must know that his tactical situation is hopeless. He will offer surrender in exchange for guarantees of protection for non-combatants." Captain Vasquez nodded, and activated the communication system. Put Admiral Zeftar through. The holographic display shifted to show the familiar crystalline form of the Council's senior military commander. Admiral Zeftar's four arms gestured in patterns that Mordan recognized as indicating extreme stress, but his voice remained steady as he spoke. Captain Vasquez, Admiral Zeftar said, his translator converting his harmonic speech patterns into English. I request terms for the surrender of the Council Defense Force. Terms, Captain Vasquez replied, her tone suggesting mild amusement. Admiral, you're not in a position to request terms. You're in a position to accept the inevitable. Zeftar's crystalline structure darkened with emotion. We have 3,000 ships under my command, Captain. Even against human tactical superiority, we can inflict significant casualties before we're defeated. Surely avoiding unnecessary bloodshed serves human interests as well as our own. Mordan watched the exchange with the analytical detachment he'd learned to cultivate. The Admiral was playing his role perfectly, exactly as human psychological profiling had predicted. Honorable, rational, willing to sacrifice himself, but desperate to protect his crews and civilians. You're correct that you could inflict casualties, Captain Vasquez acknowledged. However, you're operating under several false assumptions about your tactical situation. The holographic display shifted to show detailed intelligence analysis of the Council fleet disposition. Admiral Zeftar's form flickered with surprise as he realized how thoroughly human intelligence had penetrated his operational security. We know about the hidden minefields around Kepler 442, Captain Vasquez continued conversationally. We know about your concealed weapon platforms. We know about your emergency reinforcement protocols and the coded communications you believe are secure. Most importantly, we know about the weaknesses in your defensive strategy that you haven't recognized yet. Admiral Zeftar's voice carried harmonics of disbelief. That's impossible. Our security measures were designed by species that think defensively, Captain Vasquez interrupted. You fortify positions, establish defensive perimeters, and prepare to resist attack. It's logical, rational, and completely inadequate against enemies who think offensively. Mordan felt compelled to speak. Admiral, he said, his voice carrying the clicks and harmonics of their shared language. You're facing opponents who have already won this battle. The question now is whether you want to minimize casualties or maximize them. The sight of Mordan in human uniform sent ripples of shock through Admiral Zeftar's crystalline structure. High Strategist Mordan, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, what have you done? I've learned to think like they do, Mordan replied simply. And I've learned that resistance only increases the cost without changing the outcome. Captain Vasquez manipulated the holographic display, showing Admiral Zeftar the true extent of human force deployment. The Admiral's shocked silence was evidence enough that he was finally beginning to understand the hopelessness of the situation. The fleets you see represent less than 20% of current human military capability, Captain Vasquez explained. While you've been concentrating your forces for this final battle, we've been positioning assets throughout Council space. Every major population center, every industrial facility, every communication hub is currently under human operational control. The display showed real-time footage from dozens of worlds. Human forces had indeed achieved what should have been impossible, simultaneous conquest of an entire galactic civilization. The strategic elite had turned warfare into a science, and the Council had never understood that they were specimens in an experiment rather than opponents in a battle. Ow! Admiral Zeftar asked, his voice carrying harmonics of defeat. Because you think like civilized beings, Captain Vasquez replied. You assume that warfare has rules, that conquest takes time, that enemies will telegraph their intentions and fight fairly. Humans stopped thinking that way several thousand years ago. Mordan watched as the Admiral processed this information. Around the command center, human officers continued their work with the calm efficiency that had made them masters of an entire galaxy. They showed no excitement, no bloodlust, no satisfaction in victory. They simply moved from one completed objective to the next with machine-like precision. It was terrifying. What happens to our populations? Admiral Zeftar asked finally. That depends on their willingness to adapt to human administration, Captain Vasquez replied. Species that demonstrate the capacity for strategic thinking and useful skills will be integrated into human civilization as junior partners. Species that cannot adapt will be relocated to reservation worlds where they can maintain their traditional cultures without interfering with galactic development. And those who resist. Captain Vasquez's expression didn't change, but Mordan detected subtle shifts in the command center's atmosphere. Ghost Company operators exchanged glances. Prometheus Group analysts paused in their work. Obsidian Circle specialists looked up from their data streams. Resistance is strategically counterproductive, Captain Vasquez said simply. The strategic elite has developed very efficient methods for discouraging counterproductive behavior. Admiral Zeftar's form went completely transparent, a crystalline fear response that indicated overwhelming terror. He had apparently grasped the implications of that carefully neutral statement. I surrender the Council Defense Force unconditionally, he said, his voice barely audible through the translator. Accepted, Captain Vasquez replied. Your ships will power down weapons and prepare to receive boarding parties. Your crews will be processed according to their individual capabilities and psychological profiles. Useful personnel will be retrained for service in human expansion operations. Others will be relocated to appropriate facilities. The communication ended, leaving the command center in silence except for the ambient hum of life support systems. Mordan watched as human efficiency took over the process of victory. Orders were issued, fleets moved into position, and the final resistance of galactic civilization was systematically dismantled. How do you feel? Captain Vasquez asked quietly, moving to stand beside Mordan at the tactical display. Mordan considered the question carefully. How did he feel about helping to plan the conquest of his own civilization? About using his analytical skills to optimize the efficiency of species extinction? About becoming complicit in the transformation of the galaxy into a human empire? Terrified, he admitted, impressed, and grateful that you offer me the choice to survive. Captain Vasquez nodded. The terror is appropriate. What we've accomplished here should terrify any rational being. The impression is understandable. Human strategic capabilities are genuinely impressive when properly applied. The gratitude is complicated. How so? Because survival was never really a choice, Captain Vasquez explained. We didn't recruit you because we needed your assistance. We recruited you because eliminating every intelligent being who understood human strategic methods would have been wasteful. You're alive because you're useful, not because you made the right choice. Mordan felt his carapace darken with understanding. There was never a real option to refuse. Refusing would have demonstrated that you lacked the strategic thinking necessary to be useful, which would have meant elimination. Accepting demonstrated sufficient analytical capability to be worth preserving. Either way, human interests were served optimally. Around them, the command center continued its efficient operation. Reports came in from throughout Council space as the last pockets of resistance were identified and neutralized. Ghost Company teams reported successful completion of their objectives. Prometheus Group provided assessments for the integration of conquered populations. Obsidian Circle began planning intelligence operations for the next phase of expansion. The next phase? Mordan asked, reading the data streams. Captain Vasquez activated a new holographic display showing star charts that extended far beyond the former boundaries of Council space. The galaxy contains approximately 400 billion stars, High Strategist. Council civilization represented less than 1% of potentially habitable systems. Our work is just beginning. The implications staggered Mordan. Humanity hadn't just conquered the Council. They had used the conquest as a training exercise for galactic domination on an unimaginable scale. The strategic elite had spent months perfecting their methods on Council resistance, learning how to optimize conquest efficiency and minimize resource expenditure. How long? Mordan asked. Prometheus Group estimates 18 months for complete galactic pacification, assuming we encounter no species with strategic capabilities superior to those demonstrated by Council civilizations, Captain Vasquez replied. Current analysis suggests this is a conservative estimate. Mordan stared at the star charts, showing the extent of human ambition. Hundreds of species, thousands of worlds, countless billions of intelligent beings who had no idea that their civilizations were about to be systematically evaluated, conquered, or eliminated by strategic planners who viewed galactic conquest as a technical problem to be solved efficiently. And after the galaxy? Captain Vasquez's smile was genuinely terrifying. The strategic elite doesn't plan for after, high strategist. We plan for next. The galaxy is simply humanity's first large-scale strategic objective. There will be others. As if to emphasize her point, the holographic display shifted to show long-range sensor data from beyond the galactic rim. Deep space observation posts were already detecting signs of intelligent life in neighboring galaxies. The human expansion apparatus was preparing for challenges that wouldn't arise for millions of years. It was strategic thinking on a scale that defied comprehension. Will you help us? Captain Vasquez asked, though they both knew it wasn't really a question. Mordan looked around the command center at the human officers who had accomplished the impossible through nothing more than superior strategic thinking. They had turned warfare into a science, conquest into an art form, and galactic civilization into a stepping stone toward objectives that most species couldn't even imagine. They were everything he had spent his career trying to understand, and everything his species had been right to fear. Yes, he said simply, because there had never been any other answer. The galaxy had feared humanity's warriors. Then they had learned to fear humanity's weapons and technology. Finally, they had discovered they should have been fearing humanity's capacity for strategic thinking. But it was too late for fear now. The strategic elite had finished their work, and the galaxy belonged to humanity. The question now was what they planned to do with the rest of the universe.